The April rain fell gently against the large windows of our Westchester County home. I stood in our kitchen, putting the finishing touches on my birthday cake, a small but elegant vanilla confection with fresh berries. 40 candles waited to be lit, a milestone I'd been dreading for months. But Richard had promised to make it special. "Emily, darling," my mother's voice rang out from the living room where 20 of our closest friends and family had gathered. "When is Richard getting here? Everyone's waiting." I checked my watch, 7:45 p.m. He was over an hour late, again. "He's on his way," I said with a practiced smile. "You know how those investment banking meetings can run long." The truth was, I hadn't heard from him since our brief morning conversation, when he'd reminded me about the surprise he'd been hinting at for weeks. "It's big, Em. Really big. You'll see tonight." I'd been married to Richard Harrington for 15 years. He was brilliant, ambitious, and successful, everything I thought I wanted when we met at Columbia Law School. While he pursued investment banking, I'd built a respectable career as a corporate attorney, though I'd scaled back to part-time after we married. Our life looked perfect from the outside, the beautiful home, the country club memberships, the vacations to St. Bart's. But behind closed doors, we'd grown distant. Richard worked constantly, and when he was home, he was distracted, secretive with his phone. I'd ignored the signs for months. The late nights, the unexplained weekend conferences, the new cologne I didn't recognize. "Mum?" My sister Jessica appeared at my side, concern etched on her face. "Dad wants to know if we should start without Richard." I nodded, forcing brightness into my voice. "Yes, let's—" The sound of tires on gravel interrupted me. Through the kitchen window, I could see headlights sweeping across our circular driveway. "He's here!" I exclaimed, relief washing over me. I smoothed my navy cocktail dress, the one Richard had always loved, and headed toward the front door. What I saw stopped me cold. Richard was stepping out of a sleek, brand-new Porsche Taycan. Electric blue, exactly the car I'd admired in a showroom months ago. My heart leapt. This was the surprise. Despite everything, he'd remembered. But then, the passenger door opened. A woman emerged, tall, blonde, maybe 30. She wore a fitted red dress that highlighted every curve. Richard helped her out, his hand lingering on her lower back, in a gesture of intimacy I recognized all too well. "Emily!" Richard called out, waving as if this were completely normal. "Sorry, we're late. Traffic was brutal coming up from the city." My family had gathered behind me, their confused murmurs creating a backdrop to my humiliation. "Richard," I managed, my voice barely audible. "What's going on?" He approached with the woman in tow, his smile never faltering. Up close, I could see she was wearing diamond earrings, identical to ones I'd wanted for Christmas that Richard had claimed were unnecessarily extravagant. "Emily, everyone, this is Vanessa. Vanessa, this is my wife Emily and, well, everyone important in our lives." The silence was deafening. Vanessa had the decency to look uncomfortable, but Richard seemed oblivious to the tension. "Richard," my father said, his voice dangerously calm. "Perhaps we could speak privately." "In a minute, Charles." Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out a key fob. "First, I need to give Vanessa her gift." He held up the keys to the Porsche, the blue metallic keychain catching the light. "Happy 6-month anniversary, sweetheart." The collective gasp from my family was audible. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Jessica stepped forward protectively. "You bought her a car," I whispered, struggling to process what was happening. "On my birthday." Richard finally seemed to register the room's reaction. He frowned slightly. "Emily, don't make a scene. We can discuss this later." "Later?" My voice rose. "You brought your mistress to my birthday party and gave her the car I wanted, and you want to discuss it later?" Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. "Richard, you said you were separated." "We are," he said quickly. "Emotionally, anyway. Emily understands. We've been growing apart for years." I stared at this stranger who had been my husband for 15 years. How had I missed this? The emotional distance, yes, but this level of disrespect, of cruelty. I think you should leave, I said quietly. Emily, both of you. Now. Richard's face hardened. This is my house too, I paid for it. My father stepped forward. Son, I strongly suggest you leave before I forget I'm a gentleman. Richard looked around at the hostile faces, then shrugged. Fine, we'll go. But Emily, we need to talk tomorrow about divorce. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Tomorrow, I agreed, my voice steadier than I expected. At my lawyer's office, 10 a.m. He looked startled. You already have a lawyer? I hadn't, not yet. But he didn't need to know that. 15 years of marriage, Richard, and you couldn't even wait until after my birthday to humiliate me. I held his gaze. I think I deserve better than that, and I intend to get it. Richard's jaw tightened. Without another word, he took Vanessa's arm and led her back to the Porsche. The engine roared to life, and they sped away down our long driveway, leaving me standing in the doorway of the home we'd built together, surrounded by stunned family members and the shattered remains of my marriage. That night, after everyone had left with awkward hugs and promises to call the next day, I sat alone in our bedroom. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a clear April night. I opened my laptop and began searching for the best divorce attorneys in New York. Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Lowell will see you now. I followed the receptionist through the sleek hallways of Lowell, Bennett & Associates, one of Manhattan's premier divorce law firms. The offices exuded wealth and power, exactly what I needed. 3 months had passed since my disastrous birthday. 3 months of Richard moving between our house and Vanessa's downtown apartment, of discovering hidden bank accounts, of piecing together the extent of his betrayal. James Lowell rose from behind his impressive desk as I entered. In his mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and piercing eyes, he had a reputation for being ruthless yet ethical, the perfect combination. Emily, good to see you. How are you holding up? I'm managing, I replied, taking a seat, but I need to discuss something troubling. I placed a folder on his desk. My friend at Morgan Stanley sent these over. Richard has been moving assets, significant assets. James opened the folder and scanned the documents, his expression darkening. Nearly $4 million transferred to offshore accounts in the Caymans over the last 6 months. He looked up sharply. This is good work, Emily. Your background in corporate law is proving useful. I'd spent weeks meticulously tracking Richard's financial maneuvers. As his wife and a lawyer myself, I knew what to look for. There's more, I said. The Hamptons house, the one we bought last summer, he's transferred ownership to an LLC that I believe is controlled by Vanessa's brother. James nodded, taking notes. Attempting to shield assets. Classic move, but sloppy execution. He tapped his pen against the desk. The judge won't look kindly on this. Speaking of judges, I said, has our case been assigned yet? Yes, Judge Eleanor Montgomery. James smiled for the first time. She has very little patience for hiding assets or infidelity, particularly when both occur together. A small flicker of hope sparked within me. So we have a chance at the equitable distribution we discussed. More than a chance, Emily, but we need to be thorough. Richard's firm, Harrington Capital, has complex compensation structures, bonuses, stock options, carried interest from their funds. We need to account for everything. I pulled out another folder. I've compiled a list of his expected compensation for the next 3 years, based on deals I know are closing, including the Silicon Valley acquisition he's been working on. James raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. Most of my clients can barely provide bank statements. Most of your clients probably didn't review their husband's partnership agreements as a favor to the firm's general counsel, I replied with a small smile. Or spend 15 years listening to him boast about deals over dinner. His arrogance will be his downfall, James noted. Now, about the hearing next week. It's just preliminary, but Richard will be there with Vanessa. Are you prepared to see them together? The thought made my stomach clench, but I nodded firmly. I am. Good, because we have something they don't expect. James produced another document. The prenuptial agreement, the one Richard's been relying on to limit your settlement. What about it? It includes a fidelity clause with significant financial penalties. A clause Richard apparently forgot about when he decided to flaunt his affair at your birthday party. I felt a surge of vindication. Richard had insisted on the prenup before our wedding, claiming it was standard for someone in his position. I'd agreed, never imagining it would one day work in my favor. So what does this mean for us? I asked. It means the prenup he thought would protect him actually strengthens our position considerably. The fidelity clause stipulates that in case of proven infidelity, the division of assets shifts from 70-30 in his favor to 50-50, and you're entitled to an additional lump sum. I couldn't help but smile. And we definitely have proven infidelity. 20 witnesses at your birthday party, plus the car registration in Vanessa's name, dated that same day. James chuckled. I'd say that's ironclad. The following week, I sat in the Manhattan family court, directly across from Richard and Vanessa. She dressed conservatively in a beige suit, her blonde hair pulled back, diamond earrings notably absent. Richard looked tired, the confident smirk he'd worn on my birthday replaced by a tense scowl. Judge Montgomery, a stern-looking woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, reviewed our filings with careful attention. Mr. Harrington, she said finally, looking up at Richard, would you care to explain these offshore transfers made in the months preceding your separation? Richard's attorney, a slick man from a prestigious firm, leaned forward. Your Honor, those transfers represent legitimate business investments, unrelated to the marital assets. Interesting, Judge Montgomery replied, her tone suggesting she found it anything but. And the Hamptons property transferred to Blue Ocean LLC, also unrelated. That was a long-planned business transaction, Your Honor. A transaction that occurred 2 weeks after Mrs. Harrington filed for divorce, the judge noted dryly. And coincidentally, Blue Ocean LLC appears to be registered to the brother of, she consulted her notes, Ms. Vanessa Baker, who is present in the courtroom today. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa stared at the floor. Your Honor, James interjected smoothly. We'd also like to draw attention to Exhibit C, the prenuptial agreement signed by both parties in 2009, specifically the fidelity clause on page 16. The judge reviewed the document, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she looked directly at Richard. Mr. Harrington, this court takes a very dim view of attempts to hide marital assets, particularly when combined with such, shall we say, flagrant disregard for both the letter and spirit of a binding prenuptial agreement. She removed her glasses. I'm issuing a temporary restraining order freezing all assets pending further proceedings, including the vehicle registered to Ms. Baker on April 15th of this year, the blue Porsche Taycan. Richard's face reddened. Your Honor, that car was a gift purchased with marital funds during the marriage, Mr. Harrington. Ms. Baker will need to surrender the vehicle to the court's custody by 5 p.m. tomorrow. Vanessa's head snapped up, her expression one of disbelief. Richard placed a hand on her arm, whispering something that appeared to do little to comfort her. As we left the courtroom, I caught Richard's eye. For the first time since our marriage imploded, I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. Good, I thought. He should be afraid, because this was just the beginning. That evening, I sat on the terrace of our Westchester home, soon to be my home alone if James had his way. The summer air was warm, filled with the scent of the roses I'd planted years ago. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. How did it go? I typed back, the judge ordered Vanessa to surrender the Porsche. Her reply came immediately. Justice! I smiled, sipping my wine as I looked out over the gardens. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but today had shown me something important. I was stronger than I knew. And Richard, he was about to learn that betrayal comes with consequences. The courthouse steps gleamed in the October sunlight as I made my way inside for what James assured me would be our final hearing. 6 months had passed since that first preliminary session, 6 months of depositions, financial disclosures, and increasingly desperate settlement offers from Richard's team. "Emily," James called, waving from near the security checkpoint. He looked confident in his tailored navy suit, ready for the grand finale. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, adjusting the lapel of my cream-colored blazer. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. Professional but not flashy, successful but not ostentatious, the perfect image of a wronged spouse deserving of justice. Inside the courtroom, Richard and his attorney were already seated. Vanessa was conspicuously absent. "Where's your girlfriend?" James whispered as we took our places. Richard overheard. "Not that it's any of your business, but we're taking some time apart." I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. According to Jessica's friend who worked at Richard's firm, Vanessa had been devastated when forced to surrender the Porsche. Their relationship had deteriorated rapidly after that, especially when Richard refused to buy her a replacement. Judge Montgomery entered, and we all rose. She'd presided over every hearing in our case, growing increasingly irritated with Richard's legal team's tactics. "Good morning," she said, settling behind the bench. "I understand both parties have reviewed my proposed judgment?" "Yes, Your Honor," James and Richard's attorney replied in unison. "Excellent. Before I finalize my ruling, are there any matters either side wishes to address?" Richard's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client wishes to emphasize that many of the assets in question were acquired through his business acumen alone. Mrs. Harrington's contributions to Harrington Capital were minimal at best." I felt my cheeks flush with anger. James placed a calming hand on my arm. "Is that so?" Judge Montgomery peered at Richard over her glasses. "Mr. Harrington, did Mrs. Harrington review your firm's partnership agreements?" Richard looked surprised. "Well, yes, but... And did she provide legal counsel regarding regulatory compliance for your European expansion in 2017? She did some preliminary work, but... And did she not reduce her own promising legal career to manage your household, entertain your clients, and serve on charitable boards that enhanced your firm's reputation?" Richard fell silent. "Your Honor," James interjected smoothly, "Mrs. Harrington has documentation showing she provided over 200 hours of unbilled legal consultation to Harrington Capital last year alone. At standard partner rates, that represents approximately $175,000 in services." Judge Montgomery nodded. "I've reviewed those documents, Mr. Lowell. They were quite persuasive." She turned her attention back to Richard. "Mr. Harrington, this court recognizes that marriage is both an emotional and economic partnership. Mrs. Harrington's contributions, while different from yours, were substantial and directly contributed to your success." Richard's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "Now, regarding the matter of the prenuptial agreement," the judge shuffled her papers. "The fidelity clause is both clear and enforceable. Mr. Harrington violated this clause in a particularly public and humiliating manner." I felt a surge of vindication as Judge Montgomery continued. "Furthermore, the court finds that Mr. Harrington engaged in dissipation of marital assets and attempted to hide significant funds." She fixed Richard with a stern look. "This behavior has factored heavily into my decision." My heart raced as she began to outline the specifics of the judgment. "The Westchester home is awarded to Mrs. Harrington, along with its contents. The Manhattan apartment is to be sold, with proceeds divided equally. Mrs. Harrington is awarded the Hamptons property that Mr. Harrington attempted to transfer to Blue Ocean LLC. That transfer is hereby nullified." Richard's face grew increasingly pale. "Regarding financial assets, Mrs. Harrington is entitled to 50% of all marital assets, including retirement accounts, investment portfolios, and bank accounts. Additionally, the fidelity clause triggers a payment of $2 million. Richard leaned forward, whispering frantically to his attorney, who shook his head in response. Furthermore, Judge Montgomery continued, the blue Porsche Taycan currently in the court's custody is awarded to Mrs. Harrington. I nearly gasped. James had mentioned this possibility, but I hadn't dared hope. Your Honor, Richard's attorney protested, that vehicle was purchased after the couple had effectively separated. Mr. Davenport, the court has already established that the vehicle was purchased with marital funds while the couple was legally married. Moreover, the timing and circumstances of the purchase, on Mrs. Harrington's birthday, presented publicly to Mr. Harrington's paramour, demonstrates particularly egregious behavior that this court cannot ignore. She signed the document before her with a flourish. This judgment is final. Court is adjourned. The sharp crack of her gavel echoed through the courtroom. It was over. Outside, beneath the brilliant blue October sky, James handed me a set of keys. The Porsche is in the courthouse parking garage, space 37. It's been detailed and filled with gas, courtesy of the court custodian. I stared at the blue keychain, the same one Richard had presented to Vanessa that April night. I don't know if I even want it, I admitted. James smiled. Whether you keep it, sell it, or donate it to charity is entirely up to you. But I think you should at least drive it once. Consider it a victory lap. Key? As I approached the sleek electric blue sports car, I saw Richard emerging from the courthouse, alone and defeated. Our eyes met briefly across the parking lot. I didn't smile or gloat. I simply held his gaze for a moment before sliding into the driver's seat of the car he'd bought for another woman. The engine purred to life, quiet and powerful. As I pulled away from the courthouse, I didn't look back. The future stretched before me, like an open road, uncertain perhaps, but mine to navigate on my own terms. 1 year later, I stood in the bright kitchen of my Westchester home, arranging flowers for my 41st birthday dinner. The April evening was mild, cherry blossoms visible through the windows I'd had enlarged during the renovation. Mom wants to know if you need any help with the appetizers, Jessica said, entering with a glass of wine in hand. Tell her everything's under control, I replied, placing the last tulip in the arrangement. But she can open another bottle of the Cabernet if she wants to feel useful. Jessica laughed. You seem different this year, more relaxed. I am. I adjusted a place setting on the dining table, set for 12 close friends and family. Amazing what getting rid of 180 pounds of cheating husband can do for your stress levels. The doorbell rang, and Jessica went to answer it. I heard friendly greetings and the sound of gifts being placed on the entry table. My life had transformed dramatically in the year since the divorce was finalized. I'd sold the Porsche. Driving it had given me satisfaction, but keeping it felt like holding on to the past. The proceeds had funded the kitchen renovation and a women's legal aid initiative I'd started with 3 former colleagues. I'd also returned to practicing law full-time, joining a boutique firm specializing in corporate governance. My experience with Richard's financial maneuvering had given me valuable insight into how executives might attempt to hide assets or manipulate company resources. Emily, this place looks amazing, my friend Diane exclaimed, entering the kitchen with a beautifully wrapped package. The new windows make such a difference. Thanks, I smiled, accepting her hug. But wait until you see the back garden. The landscapers just finished last week. As more guests arrived, I found myself relaxing into the celebration in a way I couldn't have imagined a year ago. There was no anxious checking of the time, no wondering if Richard would show up, no forced smiles hiding humiliation. Speech time, Jessica announced after dinner, as my mother brought out a chocolate cake adorned with 41 candles. I stood, wineglass in hand, looking at the beloved faces around my table. First, thank you all for being here, not just tonight, but throughout this entire journey. A year ago, I couldn't imagine ever celebrating my birthday again without painful memories. Murmurs of support circled the table, but standing here now I realize something important. What happened last year wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a better one. My father raised his glass. To new beginnings. And to Emily, Jessica added, who showed us all what resilience looks like. After the cake was served and the candles extinguished, I stepped outside onto the terrace for a moment alone. The night air was cool against my skin, stars visible above the trees. My phone buzzed with a text message. I expected Jessica asking where I'd put the coffee pods, but instead saw Richard's name on the screen for the first time in months. Happy birthday, Emily. I hope this year is better than the last. I'm sorry for everything. I stared at the message, surprised not by the apology, but by my own reaction to it. There was no surge of anger, no twist of pain, just a calm acknowledgement of words that came far too late. According to mutual friends, Richard's life had unraveled significantly after our divorce. Vanessa had ended their relationship when the money stopped flowing. Several clients had pulled their investments from Harrington Capital after the divorce revelations. He'd had to sell his Manhattan apartment and move to a smaller place in Brooklyn. I considered responding but realized I had nothing to say. Instead, I deleted the message and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Everything okay out here? Jessica asked, joining me on the terrace. Perfect, I replied honestly, just taking a moment to appreciate how far I've come. Jessica looped her arm through mine. You know what the best part is? You didn't just survive, Em. You thrived. Back inside, surrounded by laughter and conversation, I felt a profound sense of peace. The path forward wasn't perfect or complete. I was still healing, still discovering who Emily Harrington was outside of her marriage. But for the first time in years, I was excited about the journey. Later that night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, I stood in my bedroom, recently redecorated in colors and textures I'd always loved, but Richard had dismissed as too feminine. On my dresser sat a framed photo from my law school graduation, my younger self beaming with pride and possibility. I picked it up, studying the woman I'd been. You're going to be okay, I whispered to her. Better than okay. Placing the photo back, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. Still the same person, but somehow different. Stronger, wiser, more authentically myself than I'd been in 15 years. The next morning, I woke early and drove to my office in the city, windows down to enjoy the spring air. As I passed the courthouse where my divorce had been finalized, I felt a moment of profound gratitude, not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd found in the aftermath. My phone rang through the car's speakers. It was James Lowell. Emily, happy belated birthday. Sorry I couldn't make it last night. Thanks, James. The party was wonderful. Listen, I'm calling because I have an interesting proposition for you. Remember Judge Montgomery? Of course, I replied, intrigued. She's putting together a state commission on divorce law reform, focusing on hidden assets and financial disclosure requirements. She asked specifically if you might be interested in serving as a committee member. I felt a surge of excitement. I'd be honored. Perfect. Oh, and one more thing. Did you hear about Richard? No? What about him? Harrington Capital is being investigated by the SEC. Apparently some of those offshore accounts he set up weren't just to hide money from you. I processed this information without surprise. Richard's ethical shortcuts in our marriage had likely extended to his business practices as well. Well, I said finally, I guess the judge handing me those keys was just the beginning of his reckoning. As I pulled into my office parking space, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. Richard's choices had led to consequences far beyond our divorce, while mine had opened doors to new opportunities and deeper self-knowledge. I'd lost a husband, but found myself. And driving away from the courthouse that day in the blue Porsche hadn't just been a victory lap. It had been the first step on a journey back to the woman I was always meant to be.